When someone does what you promised they never could, nothing is scarier. That's not just a line to make a point. It's true. Research on human behavior indicates that individuals do not collapse when confronted with anticipated challenges. They fall apart when reality doesn't match the story they wrote in their heads. And that's exactly what just happened. They made little guesses about you, set timelines, and whispered their calculations. But you moved in a way that no enemy handbook, no algorithm, and no rumor could have predicted. Now they're blinking in confusion and replaying everything you did like amateur detectives, trying to figure out how the story got away from them. They're living in suspense. They're swimming in regret. And the funniest part is that some of them are probably trying to convince themselves that you got lucky, which is what people say when they miss out on something great. So get ready, because what you just did didn't just surprise them. It changed the whole game. First, you showed how much they depended on illusion. They built their whole strength on lies, not facts. What seemed like power was never real power. It was all smoke and mirrors, along with a carefully planned show to make you doubt yourself. They told you stories, made up fake pictures, and set up the stage so that you always felt like an outsider looking in on something bigger than yourself. But the truth is that everything was weak, and as soon as you did something that wasn't in their script, you showed how much of their power depended on you believing in the illusion. You were made to think they were strong, not that they were. You were the only thing that made their words, their presence, and their control real. You were the air that kept their fire going. The day you stopped believing in their image was the day their flame went out. And now they know the hard truth. They never had power over you. They only had power over the story you thought was real. This is why your move hurt them so much. It wasn't about what happened, but what it made people realize. You didn't just break through one wall. You showed that the walls were made of paper. You proved that the fortress they bragged about was really just cardboard that had been painted to look like steel. That exposure shakes people up in ways that take a long time to get over. Once the mask comes off, you can unsee what's underneath. They weren't ready for this to happen because they put too much faith in that illusion lasting forever. They never thought you would question it, much less tear it apart. And now they're not just dealing with the consequences of what you did, they're also dealing with the loss of their own sense of self. What do they become when their fake image no longer matters? What do they become when the audience leaves because the show isn't magical anymore? That's why they're asking a lot of questions right now. Because the ground they stood on is clearly cracked. They're left scrambling, overthinking, and doubting every move they make. What used to look like control has now turned out to be dependence. And the truth is harsh. They have nothing to stand on without illusion. Second, you didn't just break their story. You made it useless. Not only did they lose their story, but you also made it useless. People can only believe in a story if they keep believing in it, but it falls apart when it no longer fits with reality. That's exactly what you did to them. As long as you went along with what they said or didn't say anything, their words, rumors, and carefully crafted lies could last. But as soon as you did something that showed the opposite, their whole script fell apart. They can still tell it. They can still say it again, but now it sounds empty, almost embarrassing, because reality won't back it up. This is where their real anger starts. They relied on repetition for a long time. People will start to believe what you say if you say it often enough. That was how they did it. But repeating something only works if there isn't anything strong enough to prove it wrong. You didn't just argue with them with words. You brought proof into the room that they couldn't deny. And once you see proof, you can unsee it. People who used to agree with their version of events are now unsure because their story doesn't match the facts. That pause could kill them. It spreads faster than belief, and you just put it where they least expected it. The best part is that you didn't have to argue with them to change their story. You didn't need to yell or try to change anyone's mind. You just made their version useless. They can't stand that kind of loss because it takes away their power. It's one thing to be wrong. It's different to see your story disappear and the truth take its place. It makes them face the truth that their power was never based on substance, only on how well they did their jobs. Now they're in the worst spot possible, trying to sell a script that no one wants to buy anymore. They can keep talking, but every word just makes people think about how far away they are from the truth. They can double down, but that just shows how desperate they are, and they know it deep down. Their story is over, and your move was the last thing that happened before it ended. That's why they're questioning everything. They don't have any weapons left to use without a useful story. Third, they thought your patience meant you gave them permission. They thought you had given up because you were patient. They saw you as weak every time you didn't react. They saw every second you waited as a win. They didn't get that being patient doesn't mean giving permission. You weren't giving in to them. You were watching, learning, and figuring things out. You were giving them all the freedom they needed to show themselves. They thought you were doing nothing, but you were saving energy. They thought you were done, but you were just picking the right time. And when you finally did something, the shock came not only from what you did, but also from the fact that your silence had never kept them safe. This is what makes them the most uneasy. They had gotten used to the idea that they were in charge. They thought you were afraid because you were holding back and not moving. But holding back isn't fear, it's control. It's harder to hold back than to let go too soon. And when you finally did something, it showed that you weren't weak at all. You were in full control the whole time, letting them show their patterns, weaknesses, and reliance on your supposed inaction. Now they have to go over every moment and wonder about every silence. They're starting to understand that you weren't ignoring them. You were watching them. You weren't putting up with them. You were getting ready for them. That understanding goes deeper than the move itself, because it makes them realize that they were never one step ahead. They were being allowed to believe that. It's ironic that it's so bad. They thought they had lost because they were too early to celebrate. They bragged and thought you were trapped, not knowing that you were the one who had put them in that position. Your actions showed the truth. You weren't behind. You were just waiting for accuracy. And when patience and precision finally met, the whole illusion they had built fell apart right away. Fourth, you became the thing they couldn't control. They were sure that you would always be the same, which gave them confidence. They expected you to act a certain way, think a certain way, and stay within the limits they set for you without saying anything. The lies, manipulation, and false order in their whole system depended on you playing a role in a play they had already written. But as soon as you left that script, everything they had built started to fall apart. They use predictability to control things. If they can figure out what you're going to do next, they can get ready for their counterattack before you even do anything. They can use your reaction as proof against you if they know what it will be. That's why they watched you so closely and were so interested in your habits and patterns. They weren't just watching you, they were telling you what to do. And for a while, they thought it did work, but they never saw that you could break your own pattern. You did something that didn't feed the story. And in that one moment, you lost control. The best thing about being unpredictable is that it shows how much they need order. They need a plan. They need to be in charge. They need everything to fit with the plans they made in secret. When you break that rhythm, you don't just throw them off. You take apart the very thing they need to feel strong. All of a sudden, they're the ones who are caught off guard, scrambling, second-guessing, and questioning everything they've ever thought about you. And here's the part that hurts them even more. You can't fake unpredictability, and you can use strategy to fight it. They will never fully trust their control again once you show them that you can act outside of their script. The doubt stays. Even if you don't do anything else, they will always be worried that you won't react the way they expect when they try to hurt you. What if they turn the whole thing around again? That doubt is bad for them. You became the wild card, the thing they can't control to get you to do what they want. You didn't just go off script. You set fire to the stage it was written on. You made their surveillance your proof in number 5. They thought that watching you would be their weapon, the best way to keep you in line. Every look, every note, and every whispered detail they gathered was meant to trap you and make you feed the version of yourself that worked for them. They thought that having information gave them power, but they never thought about how that same information would turn against them. It didn't trap you, it showed them. It didn't make their grip stronger. It showed how much time, energy, and desperation they put into watching you. What was supposed to show your weakness is now clear proof of theirs. At its heart, surveillance always says more about the person watching than the person being watched. The person being watched continues to live, move, and grow, while the person watching is stuck, obsessed, and frozen in the act of trying to control what they can't. And that's exactly what happened in this case. They thought they had the upper hand because they were always watching. But in reality, It showed how much they needed you. Their system doesn't work without you. If you weren't there, their whole operation would fall apart. That fact alone takes away the false sense of power they used to show off. The evidence is now like a mirror that they can't look away from. Every record they have, every note they wrote, and every piece of evidence they thought they had on you is really evidence of them. Proof of their obsession, proof of their fear, proof that they couldn't look away. Because something about you threatened the very core of their power. And the irony is very strong. The more they tried to make a case against you, the more evidence they found against themselves. This change hurts them more than they want to admit, because once surveillance shows that someone is obsessed, they lose their power. They don't look like leaders or people in charge anymore. They look like people who are watching, stalking, or desperately trying to trap something that was never meant to be trapped. And now the truth is clear. They showed how weak they really are by trying to control you. They thought the light would show you. It showed them instead. 6. They thought strength was about power. You showed them that timing is important. They thought that strength was about who could push the hardest, yell the loudest, or take over with brute force. They thought that in a world where fear equals power, they could get away with anything. They thought they had won if they could make a lot of noise, change a lot of people's minds, or be very pushy. But when you did something, you showed them something they didn't know how to deal with. It's not about force at all. It's about timing. One well-placed move at the right time can break apart everything that brute force is trying to hold together. Your action wasn't over the top or flashy. It didn't have to be, because real power doesn't yell. It hits where it hurts the most. They wasted energy trying to get the best of you, but you saved yours. They tried to look tough, but you looked at the cracks in their structure. And when the time came, you didn't have to push against the whole wall. You touched the one weak spot, and the whole thing fell apart on its own. That's why your move was stronger than anything they could have done with all their bragging. Now they have to face a truth they hate. Timing shows how empty force is compared to how precise your action is. Their yelling, manipulation, and attempts to overpower you suddenly seem desperate and even childish. You didn't have to fight them on their level, because you weren't playing the same game. You weren't trying to show how strong you were compared to them. You were showing how useless their idea of strength is. The fallout is really bad for them. They used force, threats, and pressure to put everything they build together. But those things can only stay up for so long before they fall down. Timing, on the other hand, can change everything in a second. You didn't just outsmart them. You changed the whole battlefield. They can't use force anymore, because they know that one well-timed move can undo everything. And that realization is the real hurt you caused. 7. You showed that they were only united because you were their enemy. There was never real unity between them. There was no trust, respect, or shared purpose in it. You were the one who built it. More specifically, it was based on the fact that they all hated you, were obsessed with trying to keep you down, and needed to see you as the common enemy. That was what kept them together. They didn't have a real foundation without that. And as soon as you outsmarted them, the problems started to show. Because when you're not stuck in the role they gave you, they have to look at each other with nothing to hide behind. This is what happens when you make alliances based on bad things. At first, they feel strong because everyone is working toward the same goal. But the strength isn't real. It's borrowed. It's not deep. It only exists as long as the enemy they're fighting stays where they are. As soon as that enemy moves in a different way, gets bigger, or gets out of the box they were put in, the whole bond starts to fall apart. That's what you told them. The only thing that brought them together was that they all needed you to be the bad guy in their story. Without you playing that part, they can't keep pretending to be together. They need to talk to each other directly, and that's when the truth comes out. The jealousy they were hiding, the personal agendas they were hiding, and the distrust they were trying to hide. It all comes out when their scapegoat is gone. You were the thing that kept their internal problems from showing. Now those cracks are getting bigger and bigger. It's very ironic. The very people who claimed to be united against you were in reality united because of you. And when you stepped outside their reach, you didn't just free yourself. You exposed how fragile they really were. Their alliance wasn't strength. It was weakness disguised as cooperation. And now that weakness is eating them alive, they will try to rebuild. They will try to regroup. But it won't be the same because every time they look at each other, they'll be reminded of one undeniable fact. Their bond only worked as long as you were carrying the weight of being their common enemy. Number 8. They thought they knew your breaking point. You showed them you didn't have one. They were certain they had you figured out. In their minds, everyone has a breaking point, a moment where the pressure, the lies, the manipulation, or the weight of constant opposition becomes too much to bear. That's what they were counting on. They thought if they pushed hard enough, long enough, and in the right ways, you would eventually shatter. Their entire blueprint for control was built on that assumption that you'd reach your limit and fold under the strain. But when that moment never came, when you refused to collapse, the entire system they built around your supposed weakness fell apart. The unsettling truth for them is that they misunderstood what you're made of. They saw endurance as temporary, strength as conditional, and resistance as something that would fade with time. They didn't understand that your strength isn't borrowed. It's built into you. It's not something you switch on when it's convenient. It's who you are at your core. They were waiting for a version of you that doesn't exist. This is why your refusal to break cut so deeply. It wasn't just about surviving the pressure. It was about showing that their strategy had no foundation. If breaking you was the centerpiece of their plan, and you refused to break, then the whole design collapses in on itself. Suddenly, their moves don't look powerful. They look desperate. Their attempts don't look intelligent. They look pathetic. And worst of all, their confidence in their ability to predict and control human limits evaporates. The psychological blow is worse than any physical defeat. Once someone realizes they can't make you collapse, they're left with nothing to leverage. No threats work, no lies stick, no pressure has meaning. You've stripped them of the one thing they believed gave them power, the ability to define your threshold. Now they have to live with the reality that you don't have one. That's what unsettles them most. You didn't just survive, you proved unbreakable. And once someone sees that, they can't approach you the same way again. Every future attempt will feel hollow because deep down they know there is no breaking point to find and no blueprint for control that can work on you. Number 9. You force them to confront their own smallness. They build their entire sense of importance on comparison. To them, power wasn't about genuine strength or capability. It was about standing over you, keeping you beneath them, and using your struggle as proof of their superiority. They convinced themselves they were tall, but the truth is, their height only existed because you were made to kneel. Their illusion of dominance was never real. It was borrowed from your lower position, and the moment you stood up, that illusion shattered, forcing them to face the brutal truth of their own smallness. This is why your rise unsettled them so deeply. You didn't just change your position, you destroyed their reference point. Without you beneath them, they have nothing to measure themselves against. Their greatness evaporates the second you refuse to play the role of the one beneath, and now they're left exposed, stripped of their pedestal. They don't look powerful anymore. They look ordinary. They don't look towering. They look insecure. And that's a truth they can't handle, because their entire identity was built on being seen as above you. The irony is that your strength didn't shrink them. It revealed their true size. They had always been small, always been dependent on keeping someone else beneath them to feel significant. But when you rose, you forced them to face themselves without the illusion. Now they have to deal with the fact that their power was never authentic. It was propped up by manipulation, lies, and the hope that you would never rise. That realization eats at them, because once the curtain is pulled back, there's no way to return to the old image. People start to see it, too, that their authority was never genuine, that their status was inflated, and that they relied on your submission to appear strong. What once looked like confidence now looks like fragility. What once looked like control now looks like dependency. You didn't just free yourself, you exposed them, and now they are left with the painful reality that they were never giants. They were always small, always ordinary, and only looked tall because you hadn't yet stood at your full height. That truth alone is enough to dismantle everything they thought they were. Number 10. You proved that fear doesn't survive contact with action. Fear was their greatest investment. They didn't need to chain you physically. All they had to do was keep you paralyzed in your own mind. Doubt, hesitation, overthinking tools were the tools they relied on. As long as you stayed still, fear remained alive. But the second you moved, the second you acted, the whole structure collapsed. Because fear has one fatal weakness. It can survive contact with action, Once you took a step, no matter how small, fear lost its grip and had nothing left to hold on to. They never prepared for that. Their entire strategy depended on you freezing at the edge of possibility, replaying what if scenarios until exhaustion ate you alive. They thought if they could magnify the risk, amplify the potential losses, and remind you of every past failure, you'd stay stuck, and for a while, maybe it even worked. But the turning point came when you realized that action doesn't just challenge fear, it exposes it. Because when you actually step forward, you discover that most of what fear threatened was smoke, not substance. That's what rattled them most. They had put so much effort into keeping you scared, only to see that fear go away in an instant. Because their power goes away when fear goes away. They weren't ready for the change. They can't scare you anymore. They can't stop you from growing. And they can't use hesitation that isn't there anymore. They never wanted to stop you. They just wanted to get you to stop on your own. And as soon as you said no, their power fell apart. The best thing about action is that it grows. One thing leads to another. Things start to happen, and all of a sudden, what seemed impossible becomes your new normal. In the meantime, they're still trying to throw shadows at you, but someone who is already walking in the open isn't afraid of shadows. That scares them now. You learn it that fear wasn't real power. It was just a story told loudly enough to keep you from trying it. Things have changed now. You have shown that their most powerful weapon is useless as soon as you do something. They know they can never trap you the same way again because of that. You are no longer owned by fear, and they don't either without it. Number 11. You became the question they can answer. You didn't just surprise them. You became the question they can't answer. It's not just that what you did was unexpected. It's that telling the truth about it would show everything they've been hiding. That's why they're stuck now, trying to figure out what to say between silence and half-truths. No version of their story can explain what you've just done. They are wrong if they admit the truth. The holes are easy to see if they twist it. Their silence makes them look guilty if they don't say anything. No matter what, your move puts them in a tight spot. They were sure of themselves because they could define you. They wanted to be the last ones to tell you who you are, what you can do, and what limits you think you have. But what you did cut through that story like a knife. Not only did they want to prove them wrong, but they also wanted to leave them with no safe way to explain themselves. To do that, they would have to tell you about the lies, schemes, and manipulations they've used to keep you trapped. And that's the one thing they can't do. This is what makes you so dangerous to them now. They can't just ignore you or target you anymore. You're a contradiction they can't figure out. All of the systems they made, all of the names they give you, and all of the whisper campaigns they ran suddenly fall apart when faced with the truth, and people see it. The questions start to spread. How did this happen if they were so sure about you? Why couldn't they stop you if they knew your limits? If their story was true, why doesn't it make sense anymore? Every question that goes unanswered takes away some of their power. For them, this is worse than losing. You can explain why you lost, but a mystery, a contradiction, or a living example that doesn't fit their story will stay with you and haunt you. You're not just the one who ruined their plans. You're also the one who keeps reminding them that what they say isn't true, and the more they try to explain, the more clear it is that they don't have one. That's how smart what you did was. You didn't just do something, you became the question mark that they can't get rid of. Number 12. You took away the freedom to pretend. You took away their favorite shield, pretending. They depended on looks to keep them safe for a long time. They wore roles like armor, made up stories to hide their flaws, and polished their lies until they shone so brightly that they looked like truth. They could keep performing as long as you stayed where they wanted you to be. But when you moved in a way that surprised them, you took that luxury away from them. All of a sudden, there was no script to follow and no mask to hide behind. What they said was raw, unfiltered, and painfully real. That was the turning point. When the act falls apart, there is no strength or calmness left. Only panic, jealousy, and desperation. They could no longer hide it. Their mistakes were clear. Their responses were too quick, and their words were too shaky. They used to be able to keep it all hidden away, but now it's all out in the open, and the difference is clear. The polished image they worked so hard to keep up is now at odds with who they really are. This is the price of being open. The world finally sees the difference between how someone looks and how they really are when they can no longer pretend. And that space is very bad for them. They don't look untouchable anymore. They look like people with flaws and even weaknesses. Their anger doesn't look like righteous strength anymore. It looks like insecurity coming through. Their silence doesn't seem wise anymore. It seems like they're afraid of being found out. Now that the curtain has been pulled back, every move they make shows more than it hides. You didn't just catch them off guard. You made it impossible for them to go back to the comfort of performing. You can unsee something once you know it's true. People who are watching can't help but see the difference. People who used to admire their control are now starting to wonder how much of it was real in the first place. That's why they're scared. Pretending was their safe place, the one thing they could always count on. But you took it apart without even having to show them directly. You just moved in a way that made their mask fall off. You showed the difference between control and influence in number 13. They always thought that control and influence were the same thing. They thought that being able to change people's minds, shape stories, or push people in certain directions was proof that they were in charge, and it worked for a while. People went along with it, which made them feel like they were in charge. But your move showed them a truth they didn't want to face. Influence only works when people choose to agree with it. Their so-called control falls apart as soon as the agreement ends. This difference is what caused their whole system to fall apart. Persuasion is influence. Power is control. They made the lines between the two less clear, because they thought no one would ever dare to question them. They thought they were in charge as long as you let them have their way. But when you stopped agreeing with them and did things they didn't want you to do, you showed how weak their power really was. They weren't in charge at all. They were just borrowing it from the people who let themselves be influenced. Your action made them see the difference between what they thought and what was true. They thought their power was unbreakable, but it was only as strong as how much you wanted to be a part of it. Their voice lost its power as soon as you broke free. Their tricks didn't work the same way. Their presence didn't mean as much. Without consent, influence is just noise. And that's exactly what you made them into. That's why they're so upset right now. Power is always there. Influence is not always present. And you showed that condition by not going along with it. All of a sudden, their empire of persuasion doesn't look strong. It looks like they need help. They needed other people to agree with their point of view. And as soon as you tore that agreement apart, their whole world fell apart. What they thought was unmovable turned out to be very thin, and only held together by the cooperation they no longer had. The hardest part for them is accepting what this means for who they are. They weren't leaders. They were people who had an effect on others. They didn't have power. They borrowed it. And that illusion ended when you stopped giving them that power. Number 14. You made them see that they were fighting a ghost of you. They weren't going to fight you. They were fighting the version of you that they made up in their heads. That ghost version was easier to deal with, easier to guess, and easier to attack. They filled it with their own lies, assumptions, and limitations. And then they convinced themselves that it was the real you. Every plan, scheme, and strategy they came up with was meant to beat that shadow. But when the real you came out, everything they thought they knew fell apart. All of a sudden, their planning didn't matter because it was never based on reality. This is why they're scared now. They thought they knew you, but what they knew was just a guess. They thought that being quiet meant being weak, that being patient meant giving up, and that being humble meant being weak. They made up their minds based on bits and pieces and called it certainty. And the biggest mistake they made was thinking you would stay stuck in the version they made up. But they can't plan for growth. They can't guess what will happen when things change.